Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to have a conversation that goes beyond the individual picks and the individual transactions and the individual press conference moments that have defined Cleveland Browns coverage over the past several days, because what the full picture of this draft reveals when you step back and look at it completely and honestly is something that deserves to be celebrated without apology and examined without the false modesty that sometimes prevents honest observers from calling a genuinely exceptional organizational performance exactly what it is. The Cleveland Browns had one of the best NFL drafts of any team in the entire league this past weekend. That is not a hot take manufactured for engagement. That is not a homer assessment driven by regional loyalty or wishful thinking. That is a conclusion being reached by serious football analysts and media voices who have no particular investment in Cleveland's success and who are evaluating this draft class against the full landscape of what every other franchise accomplished during the same weekend. Rich Eisen, one of the most respected and most credible voices in NFL media, thought so highly of what Andrew Berry and the Cleveland Browns front office accomplished during this draft that he dedicated an entire special segment to breaking down their draft class and explaining to his audience exactly why it represented the kind of organizational performance that deserves recognition and serious attention. When Rich Eisen does a whole special on your draft, you did something right. When the national media conversation around your team shifts from questions and concerns and manufactured controversies to genuine admiration and analytical celebration of the decisions your front office made, you did something right. And when the fan base of your former head coach's new team is nervously monitoring your draft results because they are worried about how their coach's performance compares to the success of the organization he left behind, you absolutely, definitively, unambiguously did something right. Let us talk about Kevin Stefanski, because his situation is now directly and uncomfortably connected to the story of Cleveland's draft success in a way that is too significant and too revealing to ignore or to treat with the kind of diplomatic softness that sometimes substitutes for honest reporting when the subject involves a recognizable name and a complicated organizational history. Reports are coming out of Atlanta indicating that Stefanski is not exactly walking around with a spring in his step in the aftermath of Cleveland's draft weekend. And those reports exist because the people paying attention to his situation understand the implicit comparison being drawn every time a national analyst praises what Andrew Berry accomplished in Cleveland during the same weekend that Stefanski's new team was conducting its own draft operations with his involvement and his fingerprints. Here is the truth of it, stated plainly and without the diplomatic softening that this situation does not deserve. The Cleveland Browns outperformed the Atlanta Falcons in this draft by a meaningful and observable margin. The Falcons addressed their needs primarily through wide receiver additions, which represents a narrow and relatively limited approach to roster construction when compared to the comprehensive and strategically layered offensive infrastructure that Cleveland assembled over the course of the same weekend. Andrew Berry moved pieces, traded picks intelligently, accumulated value, and built an offense from multiple angles simultaneously, addressing the blindside protection issue with a top 10 pick in Spencer Fano, adding receiver depth through multiple picks including Casey Consumption and Denzel Boston, and then reaching into the later rounds to find a tight end in Joe Royer whose tape and physical profile suggest genuine receiving weapon potential at a price that represents extraordinary draft value. Atlanta got some wide receivers. Cleveland got an offensive ecosystem. That is the honest comparison. And the people watching Stefanski's situation in Atlanta are nervous about that comparison because they understand what it implies about the relative organizational competence of the two front offices and the two coaching staffs involved in each team's draft preparation and execution. Now let us be completely fair about one dimension of this conversation, because intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the counterargument even when you disagree with it. There are reports suggesting that Atlanta's draft was comparable to Cleveland's, that Stefanski's new team performed just as well or perhaps even better when evaluated against their specific roster needs and their specific draft capital situation. That argument is being made, and it is being made by people who have a professional or emotional investment in presenting Stefanski's situation in the most favorable possible light. The problem with that argument is that it does not survive honest examination of what each organization actually accomplished relative to what the sport's most credible observers concluded about the value extracted from each draft class. When Rich Eisen is doing special segments on the Browns draft and not on the Falcons draft, that tells you something about how the football world is actually evaluating these two performances against each other. National media attention of that caliber does not get generated by a draft that was just fine or just comparable to what other teams did. It gets generated by a draft that stood out, that demonstrated something about organizational capability and front office intelligence that the broader football world found genuinely impressive and genuinely worth examining in detail. Cleveland's draft stood out. Atlanta's did not generate the same level of national celebration. And Kevin Stefanski, who spent years in Cleveland watching Andrew Berry operate as the general manager of the franchise he was coaching, now has to sit in Atlanta and watch the national media praise the draft that happened in the building he left and compare it favorably to the draft that happened in the building where he is now trying to establish himself as a head coach with a fresh start and a clean slate. That is uncomfortable. That is the NFL equivalent of watching your former team thrive in the immediate aftermath of your departure, which is never a pleasant experience regardless of how professionally and how graciously you handle it publicly. And the reports coming out of Atlanta suggesting Stefanski is feeling the weight of that comparison are not surprising to anyone who understands human psychology and competitive professional environments. But here is the deeper and more important point about what Cleveland's draft success actually means beyond the Stefanski comparison, because as interesting and as revealing as that parallel storyline is, the real significance of what Andrew Berry accomplished this weekend is not about what it says about a former coach's situation in another city. The real significance is about what it says about the trajectory of the Cleveland Browns franchise and the organizational competence being applied to the specific project of building a winning team around Shedeur Sanders. Andrew Berry kept the cycle going. That phrase deserves unpacking, because it reflects something important about the philosophy and the approach that produced the draft results that are generating national attention and rich Eisen specials. Berry did not try to make one big splash and hope it was enough. He did not mortgage future resources to acquire a single high-profile piece and present that acquisition as evidence of organizational commitment while leaving the surrounding roster thin and vulnerable. He moved pieces systematically and strategically, accumulated value across multiple rounds, and used that accumulated value to address multiple roster needs with young quality players who can develop within Todd Monken's system and contribute to the competitive identity of this team across multiple seasons. Spencer Fano at number 9 to protect the franchise quarterback's blindside. Casey Consumption at 24 to add a receiving weapon through the first round of Day 2 selections. Denzel Boston at 39 to continue building receiver depth with a player who accumulated 132 receptions, 1,781 yards, and 20 touchdowns across 4 college seasons. Joe Royer at 170 to add a 6'5", 247-pound receiving tight end whose tape evaluators are describing in terms that suggest genuine late-round steal territory. The pick acquired from the Kansas City Chiefs trade that delivered a 2026 first, a 2026 third, and a 2026 fifth in exchange for moving up to acquire Fano, ensuring that the draft capital expended to get the blindside protector did not leave the franchise depleted in subsequent years. That is not one good pick. That is not 2 good picks surrounded by filler. That is a coherent and comprehensive draft class constructed with specific organizational intention around a specific quarterback and a specific offensive vision, executed with the kind of professional discipline and evaluative thoroughness that produces the results the national media is now celebrating. And the people who said Shedeur Sanders was not the guy, the people who spent weeks and months suggesting the organizational commitment to the young quarterback was softer than the public statements indicated, the people who interpreted every moment of minicamp ambiguity and every quarterback competition narrative as evidence that Cleveland might pivot away from the player it had publicly committed to building around, those people now have to sit with a draft that invested a top 10 pick in blindside protection for Sanders, that added multiple offensive weapons through subsequent picks, and that built an offensive infrastructure whose entire design reflects the assumption that Shedeur Sanders will be the quarterback standing under center when all of these pieces are deployed together in a competitive NFL environment. The Browns did not draft around a question. They drafted around an answer. And the answer has a name. Wears the number 2 jersey, was first in 11 on 11 drills at minicamp, wore a helmet camera while his coaching staff studied every read and every decision he made, and has been told by his head coach in the clearest possible terms that his reps and his standing within this organization will not be compromised by any roster decision made above the coaching staff's level. Shedeur Sanders is the Cleveland Browns quarterback, and Andrew Berry just spent a draft weekend proving it in the most concrete and most permanent way available to a professional football front office. Now let us acknowledge the full picture of where this franchise stands coming out of this draft, Because honesty requires acknowledging both the genuine accomplishments and the ongoing complications that exist simultaneously within the same organizational reality. The offensive infrastructure is being built correctly and comprehensively. The blind side is protected. The receiver room has genuine depth and genuine competition. The tight end position now has a player with legitimate receiving weapon potential and the kind of personal story that almost always produces professional hunger and competitive motivation. The draft capital situation has been managed intelligently enough that Cleveland maintains flexibility heading into 2026 to continue the roster construction process with real resources rather than picking through scraps left over from an aggressive and poorly structured trade. But the internal tensions documented during this process have not been fully resolved. Ownership impulses that produced roster decisions the coaching staff did not initiate remain a dynamic that could resurface and complicate the organizational clarity that Monken is working to establish. Jerry Jeudy's commitment level and his ability to perform at the level this organization needs from him given everything that has been built around him remain open questions heading into training camp. The Myles Garrett situation, which has generated concern and conversation throughout this entire offseason, has not been definitively resolved through public statements or observable behavioral changes that suggest his engagement with this franchise has been restored to the level a player of his importance needs to maintain. All of those complications are real. All of them deserve continued monitoring and continued honest reporting as this offseason develops and as training camp approaches and as the actual competitive environment of the 2026 NFL season begins to take shape in ways that will test every assumption and every organizational decision made during the past several months. But coming out of this draft weekend, the balance of evidence tilts decisively toward optimism for Cleveland Browns fans who have been patient enough to wait for an organization that knows what it is doing and is willing to do it with consistency and conviction rather than the reactive and undisciplined decision-making that has derailed promising situations in this franchise's recent history. Andrew Berry had a great draft. Rich Eisen noticed. The national football world noticed. Kevin Stefanski's new city is nervously checking Cleveland's Instagram, to borrow the analogy being used to describe the Atlanta fanbase's anxious monitoring of their new coach's performance relative to his former team. And the Cleveland Browns emerge from this weekend looking like a franchise that has finally found its organizational footing, its philosophical direction, and its commitment to executing a genuine long-term plan around a franchise quarterback who has done everything asked of him since the moment he arrived. The work is not finished. It never is in the NFL. But it is pointed in the right direction, executed with genuine competence, and supported by the kind of national recognition that only comes when you have done something worth recognizing. Cleveland had one of the best drafts in the league. The football world said so. The results support it. And the 2026 season cannot get here fast enough for a fan base that finally has genuine and substantiated reasons to believe in what is being built in their city. That is the story. That is the truth of it. And it feels good to be able to say it without qualification or apology.